Welcome back to another episode of Wiccan's Wicked Reptiles. On this week's episode, we're going to do a best beginner showdown. Is the best beginner lizard a crested gecko or is it a leopard gecko? Stick around. Well, let's introduce these lizards to you. The crested gecko is a nocturnal lizard. This lizard lives in New Caledonia, which is kind of a temperate area of the South Pacific. It's very cool there and very wet. The leopard gecko is going to be found in the Middle East. You're going to find these guys in parts of Iraq, parts of Pakistan. They're a more terrestrial species, where the crested gecko is a more arboreal species, and they're a crepuscular species, which means they're active during dusk and active during dawn. Well, first, are these things even available? Can I even get a leopard gecko or a crested gecko if I want one after watching the video? Well, yeah, you can. Basically, no matter where you live, it's pretty easy to find both of these specimens. The crested gecko is very easy to be found. It's very affordable. The leopard gecko is also easy. It's on every table at a reptile expo and every pet shop. Very easy to be found as well. Your leopard gecko is going to go between 20 and 50 bucks in the most part, unless you want something a little bit different. Crested gecko you're going to be able to find for the most part for between $50 and $100. A little bit more expensive, but I think it's going to be worth it. Both animals don't get very big. These are both full-grown specimens, smaller full-grown specimens, but each individual, of course, is just an individual. Yeah, they're going to be about 8 inches, crested gecko maybe a little bit smaller, and they're all both going to be under half a pound for the most part. Well, if they're both smaller animals, they're both going to need a smaller enclosure, right? Yeah, that is right. Both of these guys will need the equivalent of a 20-gallon. For your crested gecko, which needs more height because it's a semi-arboreal or fully arboreal species, you're going to want that 20-gallon flipped on its end. Or, of course, get an Exoterra front opening, an 18 by 18 by 24, for example, would house 2 or 3 very comfortably. Whereas a leopard gecko, you want more room for them to crawl around. They're a more terrestrial species. If you want to give them logs or something to crawl over, you can do that. They've got claws, where your crested gecko has more of a sticky toe type of feature, where like regular geckos that you see on the Geico commercial or whatever else, they can climb up windows and things like that. Another really important factor when you're choosing what's the best lizard is their temperament. And this is going to be a draw again, I think, because with the crested gecko, they're very easy to tame. They come out of the egg almost tamed. The only thing you have to worry about with both of these lizards is they can both drop their tails. The crested gecko is a little bit different in that it doesn't grow its tail back. If you notice here, Yoshi, or Frogbutt as I affectionately call her, doesn't have a tail. She dropped it over a year ago. It doesn't grow back. They have this little nub in its place. The only thing their tail is really good for is getting a predator to bite its tail instead of it. And it does have a little sticky pad on it, which can suction to glass and trees and things like that, but they don't really need it. Where a leopard gecko, they actually store a lot of nutrients, supplements, things like that inside of their tail. So they do grow them back. They don't ever look as good when they grow them back, but they do grow them back. But no matter what, both of these are excellent lizards for someone who doesn't want to be chasing a lizard all around its enclosure or the house. Not only is the size of the enclosure important, but how you furnish it. And of course, the heat and humidity is very important when you're picking out a lizard as well. Your leopard gecko is a drier species. You can get away with just giving them a humid hide so that they can shed properly, but you want their enclosure to be a lot drier than the crested gecko, which is an arboreal species that needs to be misted about twice a day, because this arboreal species of gecko drinks not from standing water, but from droplets on leaves, the glass, and other furnishings inside of its enclosure. Where the leopard gecko, you can get away with just misting the inside of their enclosure and having them drink on water droplets as well, but they will drink standing water if it's available to them. So your leopard gecko, you want it to be a little bit warmer, 90-ish degrees, where your crested gecko, room temperature, they're a living room lizard, I like to say. I have no heat on them. They stay around 72 degrees and they're perfectly fine like that. You don't even want them to get over 80 because they might get sick. And as mentioned before, your crested gecko needs higher humidity. They like to drink off leaf droplets in the side of their enclosure. You need to mist them, where your leopard gecko is a more dry type species. In terms of if you can go on vacation and leave both of them alone, I wouldn't suggest it. But if you're someone who travels and can't be around for 2 or 3 days, your leopard gecko, you're completely fine leaving for 2 or 3 days. Your crested gecko, you need a misting system. There's a little bit more to it. Well, now you found both of your lizards. You found them for a good price. You know where they're supposed to live, what type of environment, inside of what size enclosure. What are they going to eat once you have them? This is again where they kind of separate, where your leopard gecko here is going to be in a complete insectivore. These guys are going to eat things like dubia roaches, crickets, mealworms, silkworms, superworms, all sorts of different insects. Your crested gecko is a lot easier. Crested geckos eat a mixed diet, Pangea, Clark's gecko diet, Repashy diet, all sorts of different pre-mixed diets available for a crested gecko. And you don't need to feed them live insects at all. You can feed them pinhead crickets. I've done that in the past when they were younger. But you can actually buy Repashy and Pangea, and likely Clark gecko diet too, with insects mixed in it, or insect protein anyway, which is what I suggest if you're trying to beef up your gecko or if it's a younger gecko. So when it comes to diet, mixing something up, literally put powder into a cup, you put some water into the cup, and then you mix the cup up and you stick it inside the enclosure. It doesn't get much easier than a crested gecko. Now, of course, if you like watching animals hunt for food, get yourself a leopard gecko. Leopard geckos, it's hilarious to watch them chase crickets around. I don't really like to keep crickets inside my house. They stink and they're loud. I feed more mealworms and things like that with crickets as a treat. But it's very simple. You literally put them into the container, the feeding container, and then you have to put supplements on it, which is another thing. Crested gecko diet has supplements built into it, where leopard geckos don't have supplements built into their feeder insects. Obviously, you have to do that after the fact. And that leaves us with the lifespan of these animals. If you're going to pay very little money for each one, how long do they actually live for? Well, it's very hard to tell. Crested geckos, as I mentioned in my crested gecko video, they're really hard to tell how long they're going to live. We've only had them in captivity for a very short amount of time. Up until 1994, we thought they were extinct, for example. So this guy, I mean, it depends on the fact sheet you want to go with. I'd say between 12 and 15 years is the most common answer that I get. I've only been keeping crested geckos for 8 years, so it's impossible for me to know. Where with leopard geckos, we've been keeping these guys for a lot longer. Leopard geckos, again, 12 to 15, sometimes 20 years. It depends on which fact sheet. But I'd say if you're looking for a full-time, I want to be there for this animal from the time I get it to the time that it passes away, you're thinking about 12, 15 years probably. I'd say 15 years. One last thing I want to bring up. If you're not new to crested geckos or leopard geckos and you're just watching this video to watch the channel, thank you very much. For you, maybe you're thinking, which one is the best if I want to get into breeding reptiles? Well, I would say leopard geckos are much easier than crested geckos. I haven't had any success with crested geckos so far, where with leopard geckos, if you watch last week's video, right here, you'll notice that, in fact, we have had success with leopard geckos in the past, and right now we have 2 baby leopard geckos that just came out of the egg, and we've got an incubator full of leopard gecko eggs as well. Where with crested geckos, I haven't had really that much success. You have to incubate them for a longer period of time, different temperature. Leopard geckos are just much easier for breeding. I'll give them a point. But I would say that concludes the video. The best beginner lizard challenge. As we've been doing with all the other challenges, I'm not going to give you an answer. I don't know which one's better for you. If you're looking for a lizard that you can leave for 3 days at a time, then get yourself a leopard gecko. If you want a lizard that doesn't need live insects, then you want yourself a crested gecko. It depends what's better for you. In my opinion, what's easier, if you can miss your pet twice a day, is the crested gecko. If what's easier for you is if you don't want to be as interactive with your lizard and you want to be able to leave for 3 days at a time, get yourself a leopard gecko. So that's this week's episode of Wiccan's Wicked Reptiles. Thank you very much for watching. Thanks for sticking around and watching these videos on the channel. I really do appreciate it. What do you think is the best pet lizard? Is it a crested gecko, or is it a leopard gecko, or is it something completely different? Put it in the comments below. And of course, as always, if there's something that you want to see me talk about, something that you want to see on the channel, put it in the comments section. I'm trying to take every week's video topic from these comments. Thanks for your support, and I'll see you on Thursday.